Okay, this we're going to break up into 2 lectures, mostly the principles and then the elements. So we'll get through about 40 of the slides today. The other 40 we'll put out as a second video for next week. So this is talking about design principles and elements. There are lots of books out there on these sorts of things. Some of them will break them into as many as 15 or 20 different design principles and elements. Others as little as 5 or 6. It kind of just depends upon which text you're looking at or which designer you're looking at. But these are the component parts that go together, the elements, the component parts that go together to make up your landscape. And then the principles are more how you go ahead and combine those things. So everything in our landscape has a texture, has a color, has form, has size, can provide line and direction, takes up space, and creates shadows and shades and works with various parts of light. So everything, the house, the chain link fence, the plants, the sidewalk, all of those things go into this part of the design. So this is kind of how we're going to break these parts up. The principles then are how we combine them. Are we simple? We're using contrasts. What transitions are we using? Are we using repetition? Definitely you want to be using repetition. And how are we going to get through rhythm and balance and all these sorts of things? So again, sometimes you see these broken out into different elements. This is kind of where we're going to go from here because this is kind of the basic form of these, in my opinion. This is keep it simple. You don't need to do everything complicated. More plants, more species is not necessarily better. The most fancy gazebo or pergola you could design is not necessarily better. Don't overcrowd things. Allow things to grow. Allow things for space for plants to mature. And know your plant materials, because if your plants are only going to mature to 6 or 8 inches, there's no point in putting them 12 inches apart. They will never fill in. So this, as you can see, not complicated. This is a very simple design. If we look at this particular landscape, it is really only 3 plants. These flowering trees, the shrub, the hedge in the background, and the turf. Right. Now, yes, there are more elements in there because obviously we have some lights in there, we have our driveway in there, the street is in there. If we turn and look to the left, you will see a house, those sorts of things. But this is a very simple, very elegant design with only 3 different species of plants. There are not many species of plants here either. And think about this from all different aspects. And do you like it? Do you dislike it? And why do you feel that way about those sorts of things? Everything in here has different textures, different colors. They've been combined in different ways. There's rhythm moving from the left to the right as the things get higher. We're working with hardscaping in the rock materials and softscaping in the plant materials. And look at what you think you like or dislike about this particular picture. This one is very simple and organized. You can see everything is done in a linear fashion. We can see colors matching. So we've got the grass tips matching the background. We can see lots of different shades of green. We can see pink and the blue in terms of the flower. So we have a nice color combination. So we're looking at very simple color combinations, textural designs. And if you take a look at the number of species, it's about 5 or 6 different species. That's it. Texture is the surface appearance. That's kind of their basic, what does it feel like when we touch it, our basic definition. But texture can also refer to what does it look like things might feel like. What is the overall appearance of these particular plants? If you look here is a human being. So these trees are very, very large. You can see these gnarly branches, and yet the leaves with all of these tiny little leaflets are very, very fine in their texture. So even these large trees have several different types of texture to them. Everything here has different textures. So we've got this gravel pathway in between. So that's a very fine, delicate texture with all the little tiny pieces. We've got the purple flowering thyme. Again, very fine, very delicate. If you go a little bit further back behind the purple flowers, you'll see some more spikes, a little bit rougher in terms of their texture. And then you see some bigger plants behind that. Again, even more rough in terms of their texture. Even stairs Even here, with this very simple kind of a bluestone stairway, we can see a couple of different textures with them. The smooth surface of the stairs themselves, a slightly different texture when you go up to the top of the stairs at the landing, and that block on the side has yet an even different texture. It looks a little more coarse. If I were to touch it, I think I would feel more grains with it. Combining different textures is a fantastic way to get some interest in the landscape. So here we have very fine textured grasses combined with some more coarse textured flowers. Again, a very bold textured silver leaf combined with a bunch of smaller textured, very fine, smaller pieces within those purple and pink flowers. Bold texture in the center, fine texture on the outside. So the words that we use to describe texture, we might say scratchy or smooth, fine, coarse, rough. There's lots and lots of different words that you might use to describe things. So that could be a fine texture, a very coarse texture, smooth texture. But again, texture is going to depend upon where we're talking about. So this texture of these rocks might be smooth, whereas the texture of the plants on top of that middle of the picture here, right here, might be more rough. And then we have this smooth texture. But again, look here, different texture here, different texture here, different texture here. So all of these different textures combine to give some interest when really the only thing that you're looking at is a few little plants in the very background and a squirrel sitting on a trash can. Color. We could just do an entire session on color. Like we could do an entire class on color. This is why a lot of people want plants and flowers and annuals in their garden, because they're the visual sensation. They're the wow, the oomph in most of our gardens and our landscapes. You look at something like this and you just go, oh wow, that's amazing. That's so colorful. And we are drawn to those sorts of things, whether that's annual display in the middle or the perennial display in the background. Color can be very simple. We could replicate similar colors, oranges and reds, all different shades of those sorts of things in an otherwise very simple planting. I mean, it's really just 3 or 4 plants there. Different shades of brown, even. So if we look at this, you can see all kinds of different shades and textures, all within that same brownish red color range. Green is going to be your number one color in most landscapes because plants are green. So if we look at this, what is providing the textural interest? It's the way those plants are playing with the light and the shadows that are happening in there. Because if you look at the number of flowers, there's really not a lot of difference in flowers there. What's attractive there is the way the different greens are reflecting or not reflecting light. Form is the shape or the outline of something. So let's take a look at this picture and look at the different forms that we have. We have some triangles. We have close to a rectangle. Here's rectangles here. We've got rectangles here. We technically have rectangles here. We've got rectangles here. But we've got also these curves. Each of these little guys also has a form. Each of these plants has a form. The combination of these plants has a form. So everything that we have in the landscape has some sort of form. It's got a 3-dimensional structure, even if the words we use to describe things tend to be 2-dimensional. Circular, rectangular, square, curves. Those tend to be 2-dimensional terms, but everything in the landscape exists in a 3rd dimension. Everything has a form or a shape. Even if you zoom up really close on this plant, you can see its outlines. But you can also see that it's a 3-dimensional thing, even though, again, a picture is really only 2 dimensions. Form is going to be everywhere. The curves that form the edges of your beds, the curves that form the edges of your sidewalks or your hardscapes, the shape of the leaves of your plants, the shape of all of the plants combined, the planting, how you plant those plants together, how you combine them. Are you doing little groupings of 3? Are you doing a long line of several of them? So everything has form. What is the form or the shape of these plants? You might say pyramidal. Somebody else might say triangular. They're both correct. It's just different words to describe the same thing. combining different forms that are vastly different can really work to improve a landscape. If we took out that tall exclamation point, that purple leaf beech, that upright beech there, the landscape, it's not that it wouldn't be interesting, but it wouldn't be as interesting because everything else in that landscape is about the same size. But that radical change in form really draws your eye and you go, wow, that's different. Again, you might not like it, and that's a totally different issue. It still draws your eye. Even plants that are kind of messy have form to them, and this may have a purpose for screening or something else. But even plants that we would look at and they go, oh, that looks like you stuck your finger in a light socket, that also has a form to it. What different forms do you see here? Just think about for a second what different forms you see when you look at this design. It's very, very simple. It's really just turf, a ground cover, and hosta. Size. These are physical dimensions of things. And I know that one picture showed that upright beech that really almost looked out of place. But we want things to be in scale as much as possible. But we also understand that sometimes when you violate that, as this does right here with this sycamore against this house. Now that's a 3-story farmhouse, and that sycamore towers over that. That sycamore is no longer in scale, except that we revere these large trees as these holders and these placeholders in our landscapes. Right? So, but it doesn't work on a smaller scale. I'll try to show you some pictures of that. You want things to try to relate to each other in terms of size. You can make a small area look larger. We can make a large area look smaller. We can make things look bigger or smaller simply by using different scales. This right here, that's a 6-foot door to get inside that for watering and maintenance of those plants. This dog sculpture is looking out over a vast expanse of lawn, and it's in scale to the vast expanse of lawn. Is this fountain in scale to the house? Again, that's kind of personal preference. Some of you might be going yes, some of you might be going no. It doesn't matter whether you like the placement or anything like that. Is it in scale to the rest of the house and the rest of the yard? Here's a different view of that very large annual expanse. And I look at this, and these 3 little guys right out here look like they're drowning in the ocean. Like I just want to throw them a life vest because they're out of scale. There's not enough of them, or they didn't get large enough to look appropriate with the fact that this vast majority of blue is just huge relative to those 3 or 4 plants in the middle there. Again, scale can be different. It certainly draws your eye, but here we have a ground cover, and then we get just a little bit taller, and then we get very tall. And does that work as far as drawing your eye up, or all we really try to do is hide the greenhouses behind it? Here's a situation where we have a kind of typical old school foundation planting. Does look like something was probably taken out right here. So they removed something for some reason. And roughly things are all about the same size. Are they in scale to each other? Are they in scale to the house? Notice I didn't ask if you liked it or not. It's just asking whether things are in scale to each other or in scale to the house. Are they being kept in scale by maintenance? Every time you put a line on a piece of paper as a designer, you are increasing the maintenance for somebody. Are they being kept in scale by maintenance? As a plant person, I have absolute respect for these 150-plus-year-old boxwoods. As a design person, I look at that and go, those boxwoods are well out of scale to that house at this point. They're eating up to the 2nd floor of that house. So part of me says, wow, that's really cool. And part of me goes, oh, those are no longer serving a function as part of the design because they're out of scale. Rhythm is the motion of the landscape. It's the flow of the landscape. It's what causes movement. Now, here's the thing. It's not the plants that are getting up and moving around. The people are interacting with your landscapes. The people are looking at them. They're walking through them. They're sitting in them. They are partaking of your art in terms of interaction with it. It can be very simple. I look down at the ground, I look up toward the back. That's movement. I have moved my head. Maybe I have to walk the pathway to see everything. So what we're trying to do is force people to walk through the pathway. Curves are a great way to do this because if I have a straight line, I can see everything down that straight line. The instant I curve something, I have to walk down there to see what's around the corner. You have just created movement, and you've just created rhythm. But I can also stand still in this image and look at the little plants in the front and the taller plants in the back, and I have to lower my head and raise my head. You've also just created movement. Sometimes arresting the movement is the way to go. If you were to just walk down the middle of this aisle looking at your phone, not paying any attention, you might crash into that water feature in the center. But what we've done is we've changed the pattern, forcing us to stop and look. That slows us down. We've added a curve. Curves always slow movement down, and yet it's still completely obvious that this pathway is driving everybody toward the front of this house. Okay, that's where we're going to stop, and we will pick this up with the second part of this lecture next time.